Hello, is anybody on the phone? Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's working.
Is there anybody in the meeting yet besides us?
No.
I'll mute us again.
Great. Do a quick technology check. Can you all hear us online? Can we get a thumb up from Mark or others if you can hear us okay? Yes.
I can hear you.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you all so much for joining. We're very excited to talk to you. It's our second meeting for the Will County Alternative Fuels Readiness Plan. And on the next slide, you'll see our agenda for today. We'll go through a quick welcome. Like to introduce the team, recap some of the topics that we covered on the very first meeting of these, get into some of the new material that we've developed primarily over the last 5 months, share our forecast for EV growth in Will County, and share some of the survey results from the text-based survey that some of you may have filled out the last couple of months here. And we'd also like to talk to you about grant funding and make sure that everyone in the meeting is aware of literally billions of dollars in grant funding available for EV charging infrastructure. And we'll also share a few of the things that we've got in mind as we get into preparing the material for our next meeting here, which will focus on strategies. And finally, lots of time for discussion. So we hope that you will participate in the Menti quiz that we've got going. You can see the QR code on the table here, and you'll also get a prompt in the slides. So in the next slide, you'll see some of the meeting objectives. We want to particularly highlight how quickly we expect EVs to grow in the county to help frame the urgency of a lot of the work that we're doing here. Highlight opportunities for EVs, but all fuels more generally. Hear from you on actions that the county and other public agencies can take that would help to support EVs and other alt fuels. Reflect on what has worked well in the county in particular, and make sure that we take steps to incorporate some of those lessons. And continue to identify data resources that can especially be used in the strategy development, which we will discuss as we close out the presentation. So in the next slide, I will turn it over to Elaine to give an introduction.
Yeah, so welcome everyone here in person. Thank you for everyone that is able to join us online. I know this is an initiative that we're really excited about, making sure that we're really preparing for the future of mass EV adoption. I think there's a hope that we're all on the same page, pushing towards the same goal, making sure that everything's ready for when we start to see a complete switch over away from traditional fuel vehicles. So I know I really appreciate all the help that we've had so far in sharing all of our public engagement. It's all been really great. We're really looking forward to the recommendations that'll come out of this, and it's really based on what your all input is and what the general public is sharing as well. So we want to make sure that this works not just for the county, but for residents and all of our key stakeholders. So with that, if you have any questions county related, I am your go-to gal. Otherwise, I'm happy to turn it over to Adrian to talk a little bit more about what the good work is that they've been doing.
Awesome, thanks. We'll do a quick round robin of introductions for the benefit of everybody joining us by phone. My name is Adrian Heller. I am the project manager on the consulting side from Cambridge Systematics. I'll turn it over to Tori.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Tori Kurlander. I'm also a consultant with Cambridge Systematics in our Chicago office.
I'm Dan Forbush. I'm the deputy project manager, also in our Chicago office.
And I'm Linnea Gotterstead. I'm an analyst on the project. We're working remotely in Minneapolis, but in the Chicago office.
Yeah, Kaylin, if you are able to come off mute, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Chin Associates, and we're supporting the team on the stakeholder engagement side.
Awesome, thanks.
All right, and so we'll be doing quite a bit of discussion today as well, and we'll be using a combination of in-person, just conversation, hybrid with our people on the meeting online, and using Mentimeter, menti.com to kind of like get the discussion going and have some discussion prompt questions. So we won't be started with any of the Mentimeter stuff for a while, but if you'd like to log in now, you can go to menti.com. To participate, just please ensure your microphones are muted. To share a comment or question prompted by any of the prompts we have, go ahead and type it in the chat box if you're online, or just raise your hand if you're here in person. So you can go ahead and unmute yourself and join in as we do those questions. And to do that, you can scan the QR code that's printed here or that's on your screen now, or go to menti.com and enter the code we've got there. Yeah, we're excited to hear everyone's perspectives attending today. So we're excited for the discussions we'll have during the session. And I'll also put the Menti website and the code in the chat so you can click on that there. Yeah, and then we'll go back to Adrian to start some more of the presentation.
Super. So our very first public meeting is available on the website. So if you'd like to go back and actually go through the entire presentation, we would really invite you to do so. But fundamentally, what we're trying to do throughout this project is prepare the county. We do understand that there is a very quickly evolving need for sustainable transportation. We know that there's a great diversity of needs for residents, visitors, businesses, serving both cars, freight vehicles, transit, every other type of vehicle. And really, we're getting a handle of what the needs are. A lot of that material is available online on the website and on the story map that we put together to highlight some of the data that we believe is important and informative in understanding some of the growth in this space. And at the very end of this project, as we get into the final steps of this and into our final stakeholder meeting, we'll be developing strategies that are both place-based and funding-based to identify ways to make sure that there is an adequate supply of this charging infrastructure within the county and that it supports this goal of reducing vehicle emissions. So on the next slide, you'll see a little overview of some of the things that we covered in that first meeting. Really address that sort of core research question addressed in the plan, which is really what alternative fuel vehicles are available, what's their status of development, who's adopting alt fuel vehicles, how is that changing, and what characteristics of Will County can influence implementation. So thinking about things like zoning, land use, travel behavior, and other factors that can influence the type of charging infrastructure that best meets both the people that are using the infrastructure, but is also cost effective as we think about deploying some of that. We shared a lot of those results of those initial findings at our first meeting and also introduced them on our online home for this project at willcountyaltfuels.com. Lots of information about the maps and other research that we're doing here. And we started a quick preview that we'll get into in a little bit more detail at that meeting on key recent federal and state initiatives, including new funding available from the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act, or Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Inflation Reduction Act, state level Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, and EV rebate program, local zoning changes. So in essence, all of these kind of recent developments have sort of converged to provide a lot more funding and support for all fuel vehicles. And then on the next slide, you'll see a timeline of where we are in this project. So the last time we connected was at that current conditions, and we've just completed the new technology trends and forecasts. And our next major engagements will be a set of focus groups to dive into strategies, environmental justice, equity considerations, and then we'll be gathering this group again together to weigh in on strategies and present the final report. So on the next slide, you'll see some of those acronyms that we will use throughout the presentation. And these are mostly on this side to do a little bit of quick level setting before we really dive back into it. There are three main types of EVs, those that are fully electric or BEV, vehicles that use a plug and can run on either gas or electricity. Those are PHEVs, and vehicles that will always run on a mix of electricity and gasoline or hybrid electric vehicles. In general, there's a lot of support for light-duty vehicles with those vehicle types, but more and more SUVs and light-duty trucks have become available, especially in recent months. And then for infrastructure, I'll just call attention to the fact that we do refer broadly to infrastructure and not just to equipment. And that's mostly to call attention to the fact that in many cases, trenching, wiring, improvements to the parking spaces and other covering are also necessary to provide complete service to the electric vehicle. And then on the next slide, you will see an overview of some of the main alt fuels that we're looking at through this analysis. These are largely informed by the Energy Policy Act of 1992. And it includes a lot of fuels that are commonly used around the world already, such as propane or LPG, and then also fuels that are more emerging in use, such as hydrogen. And then other alternative fuel vehicles that are other alternative fuel vehicles are particularly studied for medium and heavy duty applications. They also offer opportunities for emission reduction over diesel and gasoline, although on this list, only hydrogen offers emissions reductions that are considered to be equivalent to battery electric. And of course, for all of these, there's lots of money available to support new infrastructure projects, the vehicles themselves, and really a key objective of this project that we'll just keep hammering on throughout the presentation is to just make sure that there are really strong resources available in Will County to support deployment both for all fuels, but also for electric vehicles in particular. And with that, I will turn it over to Dan to talk about the forecast for electric vehicles.
Thanks, Adrian. So I feel like a big part of the focus of this meeting in particular is to kind of get an idea of, where are we now, where are we going to go, and how are we going to get there. So to sort of start out with like a little bit of a level setting about where are we now and where are we going, we're going to first cover just quickly what the forecast has been showing for the growth of EVs in the county, and then we're also going to cover the survey results that we recently concluded about the sort of taking the temperature on how people in the county are feeling about EVs and alt fuels. So on the next slide, you can see this survey, this forecast that we're seeing, where if we go on, we analyze this assuming that we're kind of within an exponential growth of EV adoption, which is typical for new technologies like this, where we see sort of a period of more rapid growth before it starts to stabilize. So if we sort of assume that we're in that period, at the pace that we're going, it will probably lead to about 60,000 registered EVs in Will County by 2030. But there's a lot of different things that could potentially affect that. Right now, as of the end of 2023, we're at about 6,000 EVs. So that's pretty quick, even for over the course of the couple months of the study. At the last stakeholder meeting, we were saying we were just over 5,000 EVs in the county. So that's a pretty quick growth period in those couple months. So there's still definitely a lot of factors that could affect the level of growth within the county for EVs. And another situation that we kind of looked at was, well, let's imagine what if Illinois or the region were to sort of adopt more stringent regulations related to EVs, something like the California Clean Cars 2 initiative that you might have heard in the news. These are sort of the more strict regulations that California is currently pursuing. And if Illinois were to adopt those, we could see as many as 100,000 registered EVs within the county by the end of the decade. But in order to get there, we got to think about first where we are. And so we put out this public perception survey that ended as of early January. The point of this survey was a text-based survey, so we wanted to try to get a feel for how much people know about EVs, what are they thinking about them, how comfortable are they tending to purchase them, and we also looked at these questions for alternative fuels as well. So the survey, we managed to get 886 responses. Almost everybody that responded lives within Will County. A couple other people, they also work within Will County or travel through Will County frequently. Almost all the respondents use a personal vehicle as their main source of transportation. We also tried to look at a couple of different demographic groups. You can see that in the chart on the right side of the screen here. So we looked for people who identify as low income or on a fixed income, people of color, people who have a disability, and people who speak limited English. So we got a decent response from those first four categories, especially people that are on a fixed income. And the last thing I'll note is that this is, the survey respondents did tend to skew a little bit older. About 60% of the respondents were over the age of 55 or older, whereas only 2% were 25 years or younger. So as I go through the results in the next couple slides, just note that, this isn't a representative sample of the county. This is just who responded to our survey. So keep that in mind as we go through these results. So if on the next slide, we can start to see what people are thinking in terms of how much they know about EVs and what is their intention to purchase an EV for their next vehicle. So you can see this chart is kind of in four different quadrants based on how much they know about EVs, going from they don't know anything to they know a lot or they own one. And we can see that, most people have some amount of knowledge about EVs. There's only a very few number of respondents who said they don't know anything. The most common answer is that people know a fair amount about EVs. But one thing to note about this is that, some of this knowledge might be self-directed. We did ask if people had received information about EVs from an official organization, and only about 20% of respondents said that they had. So a lot of people are getting EVs sort of from their natural information sources, it could be news, blogs, internet, word of mouth, things of that nature. So that's generally how information is spreading about EVs. And you can see this kind of interesting relationship between the knowledge of EVs and whether people intend to purchase one or are thinking of purchasing one for their next vehicle. So you'll note, first of all, that the most common response are people that know a fair amount of EVs, but don't have any interest in purchasing one. So we do want to acknowledge that was a decent number of respondents. There are a decent number of people that took the survey that, they aren't ready for EVs, they have been keeping up with it, that they don't feel like it will fit them for a variety of different reasons. But another thing that you might notice within this is that as people learn more about EVs, they do have a tendency to say that they're more likely to purchase one as their next vehicle or more likely to own one. So you can see these kind of light gray bars go up as the amount of knowledge goes up. And so that to us says that there is like an opportunity here to be able to provide information to the residents of the county to help answer some questions, some common questions that might come up, and use that to promote EV adoption. And so if we go on to the next slide, we can look at some of the responses that we're getting across these different demographic groups. And it's taking a second to update. There we go. Okay. So we look at how, what was the perception of EVs among some of these different demographic groups? What is their experience with it? Have they ridden in an EV? Are they considering or planning to purchase an EV? And we did see some variation amongst this, including, people who are low income or on a fixed income are generally less likely to have experience with an EV or are less likely to consider purchasing an EV for the next vehicle. But there was one result that kind of stood out to us. So I feel like a narrative that we hear about that especially comes out of California is that, people of color are being left behind within the EV transition. And they're less likely to have ridden in an EV or less likely to purchase an EV. But at least when it comes to the survey results that we looked at here, people of color are more likely to have ridden EVs and are more likely to plan to purchase an EV. And we did some additional research in terms of matching up some of the high adoption zip codes with the different demographics of those zip codes. And we kind of saw that as well. So, both within this survey and within sort of this small little data analysis we did as part of the plan, we are seeing that, people of color, at least in Illinois, are very much engaged in this issue and are thinking about it and are potentially more likely to purchase EVs for their next vehicles. And the last thing to note here is that, younger respondents are more likely to have ridden in an EV or more likely to plan to purchase an EV as well. And so if we go on to the next slide, we can also then look at how adequate is EV infrastructure. So we did get about 200 people that own EVs to respond to the survey. And of those, so that's about 20% of respondents. And of those, almost all of them are charging their cars at home. 90% charge their car either in their driveway or within their garage. We had a small number of people say they primarily charge at work, also using public charging infrastructure. And in general, what we heard through the survey is that, the amount of EV charging infrastructure in the county is inadequate. About half of overall respondents, those who have experience with EVs, about half of them say that charging infrastructure is inadequate. And this perception is worse among EV owners, where 71% say that EV charging infrastructure is inadequate. And so a lot of factors are influencing whether people decide to get an EV. So if we go on to the next slide, you can see here, we asked about a couple of these different factors. Some of the most common factors that we saw that people think about when they decide whether to purchase an EV are the vehicle's range, whether they have the respondent has the ability to charge at home, and how reliable the vehicle is, are the top three. And then some of the other ones that are a little bit lower, like not having to pump gasoline, and the car runs quietly. And we actually thought that, 269 people said that the presence of tax credits or rebates are influencing their purchase of EVs. That's a little bit lower than what we expected. We think that this kind of reflects a little bit of a change in the perception here, because we feel like a few years ago, cost was kind of front and center in terms of the EV conversation, like how much do these vehicles cost, how much does the charging infrastructure cost, and now in these results, we're seeing more sort of lifestyle factors influencing it, like will I be able to, drive as far as I need to on a day-to-day basis? Will I be able to charge at home? And so we see people, we think that this sort of shows a little bit of a shift toward people becoming more comfortable with EVs, learning more about how they might fit in, but still having those questions about, what if the charge runs out? What if this doesn't fit with a trip that I want to take or something like that? And so to sort of hone in a little bit more on some of the concerns that we're hearing on the next slide here, we kind of highlighted, so we got a lot of comments about EVs through the survey, and we filtered it down to what I consider to be a particularly actionable set of comments on this slide. So that's from people that are kind of on the fence about EVs. So that might be people that haven't ridden, haven't owned an EV. They have some or a fair amount of knowledge about EVs, and they have a little bit of interest. They might not plan for their next vehicle, but they might be considering it or thinking about it. And we looked at especially what concerns they are raising within their decision to whether or not to purchase an EV. And you can see some of those are up here on this slide. So that includes things like the vehicle range and how long it takes to recharge. People want to know more about, what's going to happen after the vehicles have lived out their useful life? What happens with the batteries in terms of their recycling? People want to know more about home charging and if it could be cheaper or simpler. People also raise environmental impacts in terms of, what is the real environmental impact of an EV? Not just the tailpipe emissions, not just the use of gasoline. What about the manufacturing that goes into the batteries or the disposal of the batteries? You saw some people also saying about purchase costs. Some people want to make sure that these EVs can be used for long distance travel. And then of course, as it is winter in Chicago, we had some people say, what about how do these EVs perform in the extreme cold? So this is great feedback for us to be able to get. We want to try to provide some information about, to try to answer some of these concerns. So we're preparing, a fact sheet to go on the website that'll be up in the next couple of weeks. We're also curious to hear from the stakeholders here about other common concerns that they hear about EVs. And so in a couple slides, when we get to the discussion, we can take a moment to talk about that. But before that, on the next slide, we can just quickly cover what people are thinking about for alternative fuel vehicles. So we asked similar questions about knowledge, experience, intention to purchase alternative fuel vehicles. So this includes, sort of these non-EV alt fuels. We saw, in general, the survey respondents, they had less knowledge, less experience, and less interest in alternative fuel vehicles. This isn't necessarily surprising. Some of these are more niche vehicles, they serve a specific purpose. But we were kind of surprised to see that propane was the most common type of alternative fuel vehicle that respondents have experience with. Something like biodiesel and ethanol were less common. We're not that surprised that hydrogen is not very common. That fuel is hard to come by. The infrastructure is still very much in the development phase. So we thought this was a pretty interesting result. I think this reflects, to some extent, what people experience in their work lives. We see several respondents noted that they were using propane vehicles in different, some of their different job experience. So we think that might be where that's coming from. And then just one last point here about the sort of perception of AFBs. On the next slide, about the same number of respondents are saying that, of those that had experience with these vehicles, about the same number of respondents, about half, say that the infrastructure for these vehicles is inadequate within the country. So it's not that dissimilar from what we're seeing for EVs. with only 16% rating it as excellent or adequate. And just to note here that this narrative about, people of color are more likely to have experience with EVs as well. We see this more people of color are more likely to see the amount of infrastructure in the county as adequate within the county as well. So that was a lot of information, lots of graphs. I think at this point we can just pause just to see what you guys think about these results. Was there anything in there that surprised you? And yes, we are definitely also looking to see about other concerns you all might hear about EVs and all fuels vehicles as we prepare, some of the information that's coming out of this plan.
We could maybe start with one question someone had in the chat while you were speaking, just to get the ball rolling. Mark Schneiderwine said, is your study showing the use of both by these people? I think he means both electric and traditional. So example, electric for short journeys, inner city, and then regular fuels for longer hauls. So households having a mix of vehicles. And if you can say whether the survey or the research spoke to that at all.
Yeah, and I will say, right now we're looking at less than about 1% of the total registered vehicles in the county being EVs. And at the end of our forecast period, assuming similar growth rates, probably around 15 to 20% of the total vehicle fleet. So I would absolutely expect a lot of households to have sort of both in the household, especially during a transition period. And thinking about like a 2-car household, one being more specialized for kind of shorter trips around town towards grocery stores, and another vehicle kind of reserved for, those cross-country trips that we periodically take. So yeah, I would definitely say that is something that we are considering in the study.
All right, and then a couple more from the chat. Jackie Trainer said we are also hearing a lot about ineffectiveness during severe cold. Angela Shu chimed in and said we are hearing this as well. Elizabeth Irvin shared a link actually in the chat saying it's consistent with some national survey findings. Another question from Mark Schneiderwine. Yes, on ethanol, is this percentage above the 10% level of ethanol blend, or is it the higher up levels to 85%? I don't know if we can speak to that.
Yeah, I want to double check that in particular, but my recollection is that as defined in the Energy Policy Act of '92, that it does go up to that 85% blend. I don't know if anybody in the room knows off the top of their head whether or not that's true, yeah, I would have to double check it, but we're using the definition as set out by the DOE.
All right, and then, we can kind of continue the conversation for a few minutes. Anything about these results that surprised you or other concerns that you've heard. If people in the room want to just kind of chime in, or if people online want to go ahead and unmute and say any thoughts out loud, or continue to put things in the chat here. Any other thoughts people have?
I have a question. The results of the study showed that people of color were inverse to the overall results of the study?
Not inverse, but more likely to have experience with EVs, more likely to consider purchasing an EV for their next vehicle, or considering it. So it's just that it sort of bucks a trend that is kind of a narrative that's come out of California, where their demographic adoptions shows, that people of color sort of being left out of the conversation. They're less likely to consider purchasing an EV, or they're less likely to consider have experience driving one. The survey results that we have for the residents of the county, as well as the analysis that we did looking at where the EVs are being adopted at the zip code level, both suggest that people of color are definitely very much included within the trend towards adoption here.
Okay, and the results of the study show that people of color feel that the current EV infrastructure is adequate, but the overall study shows that most people felt that it was inadequate.
Yeah, it was, about 50% rating the infrastructure as adequate, and that was about the same regardless.
Okay, is the methodology for the study available?
The survey methodology, we're working on it now, or it'll be part of the study that we're putting together. So it's not quite available publicly yet, but this is the first results. preview that we're sharing with the public.
Okay.
Our workflow is to put together all of these findings as a memo, and as we move through the development, it'll be available as a report, probably towards June is my guess.
Okay.
Yeah, please.
So I know we're here talking about, infrastructure, and we're talking public infrastructure, but I think what a lot of people fail to realize sometimes is that when you talk about infrastructure, you also have to talk about it from the aspect of having the infrastructure in your home
Yeah.
to be able to charge these vehicles. Now, somebody mentioned the fact that the vehicles don't perform as well in extreme cold, and what I can tell you about that is a lot of these people that have issues with vehicles not performing in the cold is that they don't have chargers within their home.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's just like when you leave your house on empty and you don't have enough gas to make it to the gas station, your car's gonna die. Similar with the EV. That's another hidden cost, to owning the car is to be able to install a charger within your home. Many older homes may not be able to support a 50 or 60 amp charging station in their home. And then along with that, I think what you have to realize too is that it seems like a lot of municipalities are moving towards more multifamily construction. And how is that infrastructure going to fit into multifamily construction? Be able to charge these, if you have, say, maybe a couple hundred cars in a condo or apartment complex, this is something that local municipalities are going to have to look at, within their building departments, their local codes, and maybe have certain requirements, to incorporate charging stations in these multi-family, residences. I think some of the builders right now, from who I've talked to, are starting to just include like an empty conduit, like out to the garage. I know all the builders are pretty much now all doing 200 amp services within single family homes. So the newer homes are not really an issue, but I think there's a lot of other things you have to look at regarding infrastructure besides, the public side of it. So.
Yeah, no, and that's a really great point, and I think a lot of planning agencies aren't necessarily looking at those service panel upgrades as part of the necessary infrastructure that needs to be part of the conversation, and we definitely are considering that. The way that we're kind of segmenting this out is to think about things in terms of charging solutions. And one of the charging solutions that we're really focused on is how do you add charging infrastructure in a house that was built prior to about 1960, which is my understanding about when those service panels changed over. So that if you want to charge even at a level 1 level, you have access to even a 120 volt outlet that's capable of providing service to both your EV and to your washer at the same time. So I think it's a really important point to kind of consider the residential piece. I think Illinois is in kind of a good position in this overall, in part because builders are now required to provide a certain number of parking spaces that are EV ready, but you're totally spot on that those parking spaces also have to be designed in a way that make it possible for an EV, or frankly, even a internal combustion gas engine that has a lead acid battery. Even those need to be pretty warm to get started in the morning. But I think all of those have to be kind of part of the solution. It's not just the sort of the wiring, which is a lot more complicated than is I think often considered, but also just making sure that the vehicle is sort of warm enough and has everything it needs to precondition if that's what needs to happen.
You have another question that came in the chat, said, have you uncovered any studies indicated that used EVs are being purchased more by folks that can't afford the high-end new models? I don't know if the report's touched on that at all.
That's a good question. I have not seen any of that myself, although I do know anecdotally that a lot of used EVs are available very affordably. So there are very affordable options, especially if you don't necessarily need a high mileage vehicle. Last I checked, this was kind of start of pandemic, so heaven knows if this is still the case, but you were able to get a used EV at about a $5,000 to $10,000 discount compared to a comparable internal combustion engine vehicle, as long as you were able to sort of make your regular trips using a shorter range vehicle. But I think that's a good point.
All right, and unless anyone has any more thoughts on these topics, we can move to the next discussion slide, maybe. So go ahead and move forward. So this is gonna be a Menti question. So if anyone wants to participate, so we'll be, using Menti for people to submit answers, and then we'll also be, kind of using that to prompt conversation in the chat and in person here. Take it a second for it to load. So we can go ahead and state the question while it's still kind of loading up for us. Our question is, what is needed from the county on EVs and alt fuels? So for everyone here representing their different organizations, what is needed from the county? And some of the options we were thinking about are support or encouragement for grant applications, planning resources, data, direct outreach, either whether that's to other agencies, property owners, or organizations, advisory services, adding chargers in public facilities, or anything else. So if people want to kind of think about that question. Hopefully we'll get loaded up here in a second.
I see in the chat that Jackie is talking about more chargers in public facilities. That's a good point. Yeah, please.
So, yeah, I'll jump in on that. So I think what may be required from the county and municipalities across the county is that they're gonna have to take a really good look at their building codes. I think what you're seeing in California right now is I think there's a solar requirement, energy storage requirement, and then EV charging requirement on new construction. That may be something the county has to look into. If somebody's gonna come in and build a new warehouse or a Walmart or a Target, you may want to start looking at that requirement that has to be incorporated with the construction of that building to offer, public charging stations, at those locations. So.
That's a great point. That's a great point.
I want to chime in here. This is Mayor Noak. The problem there is that you're not going to have a lot of new retail development. What you need is to find ways to retrofit existing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think support for retrofitting existing property is important.
Yeah, and if other people have thoughts they want to just go ahead and say out loud based on these prompts or chime in the chat, please do.
I have a question. Do you guys know if there's precedence? A rep from IBW mentioned like ordinance or something requiring either EV charging stations or infrastructure in new construction. Is there like a precedence for that in California or in other areas?
Well, in Illinois, there are now requirements that new constructions be EV ready. And so a certain number of parking spaces have to have at least service that's capable of providing support for a charger, even if the charger itself isn't necessarily there. So Illinois is really leading the states in that already. And I need to double check with this law, the name of the law in particular. This came up just in the last year. But I would say that, that's something that Illinois has that no other state in the country has right now. So really I would say that, it's a big advantage.
Yeah, I'll add to that. There is something, so municipalities and counties, what they do is they adopt, codes like National Electrical Code. Illinois has a state plumbing code. And then along with that, they would we'll take Joliet, for example, they adopted the International Building Code, which is updated roughly every 3 years, I believe. I think right now, Joliet is sitting on the 2018 International Building Code. And I believe in the 2024 International Building Code, there is requirements for solar, battery storage, and EV. It's just a matter of the municipality or the county catching up to that code. Usually they lag behind, somewhere like 6 to 9 years, but those codes, those requirements are coming. They're in some cases, I think maybe California may be the only one that's actually implemented some of that already.
And just to follow up on that, so the rule is the Electric Vehicle Charging Act, and it requires that any house or multi-unit building completed after January 1st, 2024, so as of the start of this year, to have at least one EV capable parking space for each residential unit that has dedicated parking. So that's a statewide requirement now.
Marta Keen chimed in on the chat, said perhaps grant funds for existing locations such as shopping areas, theaters, golf courses, parks, forest preserves, or other places people park for over an hour but not all day. Brian Ross chimed in on the chat saying local governments can help with streamlined permitting and zoning variances for EV charging. Yeah, and looking at the results we've got coming in from people who are taking the survey through the Menti, a lot of people said planning resource. So that kind of speaks to chargers at public facilities, which is ranking second in people's votes. A lot of people have said planning resources. So I'm curious for anyone who wants to chime in here in person or come off mute. We've kind of discussed this topic a little bit, but if anyone has any ideas about specific planning resources that we haven't kind of already discussed in the conversation, I'd kind of love to hear what people are thinking on that topic.
What planning resources?
I'm kind of wondering, as a person who opens up that electrical bill every month and goes, holy crap, what am I spending my money on? When the thought of plugging in an electrical car, I'm very curious what that would do to my electric bill, that sometimes I'm already feel like I'm cutting back, trying to keep it as slim as possible, and it still seems to be climbing. So I'm very curious how that's supposed to happen when you have low income and fixed income people that can't barely keep their lights on. And now you're encouraging them to plug their cars in, and what's that gonna do?
My general rule, I have a Chevy Bolt that I charge at home mostly. And if you're charging at home, you generally save money using an EV compared to an internal combustion vehicle. General rule for me is about 10 cents per kilowatt hour, works out to about $1 a gallon of gas if I were buying gas for kind of an equivalently sized car. 20 cents, $2 a gallon, 40 cents, $4 a gallon. So if you're mostly charging at DC fast chargers out in the public, those tend to be fairly expensive, and it tends to be closer to that 40-cent per kilowatt hour cost. And so that's part of the reason why I think one of the things that we'll really be focusing on is making sure that there's an adequate supply of, especially those level 2 and slightly slower chargers that tend to be available between 10 and 20 cents per kilowatt hour is kind of the general range. So, I mean, there's no question that your electric bill will go up, but there may still be savings overall when we consider sort of the offset cost for gas.
And to get to what you're saying about, the cost of these things and how the low income or fixed income people can they afford these. I think we'll get into a few slides. It's definitely a great question. It's something we're going to be looking at, especially as we get into the strategies part of this study. But in a couple of slides, you can see that there are, programs coming online like ComEd beneficial electrification program that have, more incentives, higher amounts of incentives for low income people that are within certain equity communities, equity areas. We'll get into that in a couple of slides. And then the longer term question is, it's definitely a great question. So we have some of these incentives that are available now, maybe that can help people convert, but in the long term, how is this going to shape out? I think it's a great question.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because I live with a person that if you would like to hear him rant, mention EVs. That will get him ranting in a heartbeat.
I believe
So,
I'm feeling your sentiment because everybody was pushing cutting the cable cord. Once I cut the cable cord, I feel like I'm subscribing my life away now. Netflix, Hulu, but everything.
That's so true.
It's so true. Yeah, one more comment coming in on the chat from Marta Keen is the electric bill is a common concern. I'm on real-time pricing, timing the charging at night when rates are lowest. So having a level 2 charger has had little impact on her overall bill. It's kind of like her thought chiming in there. Yeah, this is a great discussion we're having. Any more thoughts on this discussion topic or
Any final words? Yeah.
Does anyone know if there's any type of labor requirement for like union labor when it comes to installing electric vehicle charging stations, new construction, stuff like that?
I feel like we should turn it over to these guys.
100% union. No, obviously, I mean, obviously, if there's gonna be any public funding for it,
Okay.
that would fall under the prevailing wage law here in Illinois. And a lot of this infrastructure, a lot of this stuff is coming either from state funding or federal funding through the IRA Act, to the Inflation Reduction Act. So there is a prevailing wage requirement, not necessarily a union requirement, but any contractors doing any type of this infrastructure work would have to pay prevailing wage.
Okay, and that's the same for incentives as well.
That's for what?
Incentives, when you say funded, so like if I wanted to install it in my home and the county had a program where.
No, I mean, that would be different in your home, that's up to you who you hire, but usually, if you purchase a vehicle, let's say you buy a Tesla, they have specific contractors that are certified to install their chargers. Okay, so they would give you the list, say, here, these are the contractors, and you can go, you can pick one off of their list.
Gotcha.
So.
Yeah, so, and Tori's done all the research on this, but for anything that is, that's being funded through FHWA, will generally be overseen by someone that has received training through the Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Training Program and is EV-ITP certified. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're the person that is installing the charger. Usually what you'll have is sort of one person who has received the certification, and they'll be working with a team of electricians to sort of support the installation. And that's exactly right. They are also subject to like prevailing wage laws. So gotta be paid well, be paid fairly. Yeah, we're expected to add a tremendous number of electricians to support the infrastructure over the next 10 years overall. Yeah.
Thank you.
And if you have anything you want to add to that.
No, we'll talk about it in a couple of slides as well. The
Yeah.
workforce development component of these funding opportunities. Has a large range.
All right.
Again, I guess I'll just take it over. Thanks, team. This is a great.
so we actually, go ahead. And then, you're right,
Again?
right,
Perfect. This is a really great conversation, and I feel like kind of piggybacking off of the needs aspects of funding. Funding is clearly an apparent need for a lot of people. But before we get into that, on the next slide, I'd kind of like to set the stage for these charging solutions that a lot of these funding opportunities are for. And many of us might know these things, but just to kind of, again, level set and reiterate. So the next slide, lagging, there we go. Graphic. So today's market consists of multiple levels of chargers, including level 1, L1, L2, and DCFC. L1 equipment at the bottom, it's it's the slowest, least expensive. It happens through a common household outlet. So you're saving money on that installation, but again, you're paying the price in time. The level 2 is the most prevalent charger in the US in terms of the publicly accessible ones you see outside, like at Jewel. They're more expensive to install than the L1s because they have software that smartly charges. An 8-hour charge on a public L2 will virtually fill the battery of any EV in the market currently. And they're the most cost-effective and ideal option for busy places like apartment complexes, retail centers, universities that want to offer faster charging to more people. And then finally, at the top of the pyramid, the DCFCs, these are the fastest chargers available currently, offering rapid charging, mostly along interstates and AFC's alternative fuel corridors. You can also see them in commercial and industrial locations as well, pretty rare residential. This equipment can charge a BEV, a battery electric vehicle, to 80% in just 20 minutes to an hour. They're not as standardized as the lower level chargers, given those special components, so they are the most expensive to install. But the good news is many grants today are targeting charging solutions at the L2 DAC level, given the convenience factor of that faster charging rate. And as well, I think we can all agree here, charging is inherently different from filling up at a gas station, and what usually would take less than 5 minutes can now take 20 minutes to hours. So with this newness, we really do have a great opportunity to kind of rethink this pit stop and invest in communities and give people options with these charging solutions, which before we do that, on the next slide, I'd like to talk about why people decide to choose EVs and what also the hindrances to adoption. And
I
sorry.
thought about selling water at the Meyer. They got a bunch of EV vehicles that parked there to charge. And there's
Yeah.
always like 10 of them there.
Okay.
And they're sitting there for 30 minutes. So I thought about going inside and selling water to them.
Entrepreneurship.
Good strategy.
So adoptions of EVs and alternative vehicles, but for this case EVs, it varies significantly based on several factors and trends, including the ones you see here in the tiles. So as Dan was talking about earlier, our team analyzed patterns of the zip code levels for the entire state, comparing the demographic traits of zip codes that had higher than average amount of EV registration. So we use registration data compared to zip codes that had an average or below number of EV registrations. And some of the patterns we found align with other states, and some were unique, especially the one about ethnic and racial diversity in Illinois. But understanding these trends can help us better understand or provide some insight into how Will County may unfold. Unsurprisingly, high adopted zip codes in Illinois were urbanized and mostly in areas near Chicago, but also in the denser, more urbanized portions of Will County, including Plainfield, Bolingbrook, Frankfort, and Homer Glen. The zip codes bordering Naperville had the highest level of adoptions in Will County with over 3,000 EV registrations, and that was as of last year. And this may be because this is where most of Will County residents are concentrated, but it also may be to your point about single family homes and the proliferation of new construction in those homes. In fact, it's homeowners are 6 times more likely than renters or non-homeowners to purchase an EV, and that's because of the ease of installing charging infrastructure. Kind of on that, piggybacking off that, rural EV adoption is considerably lagging behind urban and suburban adoption, and that's mainly because that accessibility aspect, in terms of funding, there's a lot of opportunities right now to promote rural charging opportunities. And it's not only important for the people that live there, but also the people who have range anxiety who need to drive through those areas. And another part of this task that we were tasked with was researching the potential market opportunities for the county and for EV adoption, and also the hindrances. So data shows that new EV registrations in the US market sold overwhelmingly to male consumers. And when interviewed, women describe, again, this range anxiety, fear of charging in unlit places, that perception of safety. So making sure that we have charging infrastructure in places that are perceived as safe, well-designed, and accessible is really important to help quell those fears and, again, spread adoption if that is what people choose to do. And then finally, we also found that the older adult market is an opportunity, especially in the US. The car is the preferred mode of choice for seniors and baby boomers, and with age strongly correlating with vehicle ownership. Since most trips of this age segment are usually comprised of errands, short distance trips, EVs may be an attractive option to seniors. As well, a lot of the EV manufacturers have pinpointed retirement communities as possible places to put these charging solutions. However, on the flip side of that, as we know, age and disability are positively correlated, and unfortunately, EV ownership and adoption is negatively correlated with disability, again, because of these accessibility issues, as well as with financial constraints. So it's another consideration to have here when you're thinking about this, how to design the charging stations in an equitable and accessible way, but also with some of the grant funding opportunities, they do need to be ADA compliant, especially those ones from the federal highway. And going to the next slide, we're going to zoom in a little bit more on Illinois in terms of this adoption story. So nationally, as well as in Illinois, EV adoption is highest in zip codes that are wealthier, more educated, and tend to skew Caucasian than the rest of the state. Education is a somewhat predictive factor. In Illinois, high adoption zip codes have nearly tripled the number of bachelor's degrees compared to low adoption zip codes. And looking at it a little bit more holistically, kind of going back to Dan's survey results, existing knowledge and familiarity is a big driver here. Research shows that consumers who have a friend with an EV, has been to a community event, seen on social media, they may be more likely to adopt one. In Illinois, the high adoption zip codes also have a significantly higher median household income by nearly $30,000 annually, and with fewer individuals below the federal poverty line. And these findings in Illinois reflect a greater pattern nationally. So again, introducing what was happening in the chat, those used EVs, lower cost charging solutions may also increase the rate of adoption. However, this kind of goes back to Dan's point, Illinois has way higher rates of racial and ethnic diversity than highly studied states like California, which is predominantly, EVs are predominantly in communities with lower numbers of community of color. But to kind of caveat all of this, these demographics patterns are changing really quickly, and some of these factors are becoming increasingly less predictive of adoption, particularly in race and gender. And as we reach internal combustion engine, a cost parity between EVs and internal combustion engines, those differences may shrink over time. But to round this all out, achieving Illinois' adoption goals of 1,000 EVs on the road before 2030 will require reaching out to markets that have been untapped or people who have not had that exposure. So we could do that through grants, which we'll begin to talk about on the next slide. Great, and as Adrian prefaced this whole conversation with, there's billions of dollars out there for at the resident level, utility, businesses, county government. Our analysis, we've identified over 40 opportunities, including loan programs, fixed rate financing, grants, rebates and our analysis was at all levels of government plus the utilities in Illinois. For these programs, the goals vary, but many do focus on this emissions pollution reduction, which as you can see in the table here, electricity and hydrogen are the only fuels that are considered zero emission, which is why they have more opportunities. And with that, if you have applications or projects in that range of those two fuels, they might be more competitive. As well, there are, I think I kind of hit this already, there's smaller incentives for residents, businesses, kind of the lower level, but then you have these big billion-dollar manufacturing kind of energy partnership contracts. And the next slide, we'll go to this kind of the first level of the pyramid, which is at the individual and property owner. So currently there are a number of tax credits, rebates out there for individuals and property owners. There's 3 at the IRS level with alternative fuel vehicle EV purchasing, as well as charging solutions. From the Illinois EPA, there's a rebate for the purchase of EVs. And then at the utility level, we're gonna stick with ComEd here since that's the most applicable for Will County. They have a residential EV purchase and charging infrastructure program, and they also have a C&I commercial and industrial incentive program. And interestingly, they have a pretty large equity component of those programs. So any customer that's designated as low income, EJ, environmental justice, or an R3 has a greater incentive than the base incentive. And in fact, Will County, there's a mapping tool online, and there's swaths of Will County that are applicable for that R3 as well. And going to the next slide, this community public charging infrastructure. So there are many grants. Oops, oh wait. Yeah, it's low. We're good. So right now there are many funding opportunities for public and private sector entities. Again, they're mainly aimed at that level 2 DCFC charging infrastructure, given the faster charging rates. And the most high profile of them that we think is the NEVI program through the Federal Highway Administration. This is the program that is installing charging infrastructure on the interstates, and Will County is also set to receive some money through that statewide initiative, as well as the CFI one, which is also through the Federal Highway Administration. One thing about, and before we jump off NEVI, there's currently a draft of the NEVI NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity, the grant program from IDOT that has circulated. And I should have said that earlier. IDOT is the administrator of the NEVI program in Illinois. The high level here is that the NEVI program does have certain stipulations like location where you can place your chargers, but there are a few programs out there today that don't have that stipulation, so communities can have more agency in where they choose to place their charging. An example of that is the community CFI program, and then there's a new program called the EV Charger Reliability Accessibility Accelerator Program, and that is aiming to fix broken EV chargers. And there's also a mapping tool online, and you can see that there's plenty of those in Will County that are applicable for this program. So it's one of the first programs to aim at now fixing what's already been installed. And the next slide, we're going to jump to industry and particularly freight. So there's a big push right now to electrify medium heavy duty fleets and equipment. especially those used in the public, industrial, and manufacturing sectors. We believe the county may have several opportunities for this group of grants, given the significant freight activity, including the inland port, the large network of intermodal facilities, warehouses, and the availability of industrial zone land currently. We've categorized these into kind of big three. So air quality, again, that reduction in emissions. There's a couple programs out there, more than this list actually, but interestingly, the DARA program, Will County was on the national priority list last year for that program, for that grant cycle. Then you have these, what I was kind of talking about earlier, these very large contracts from the DOE, the Department of Energy, as well as the Port Infrastructure Development Program. A lot of those look at innovative technology such as hydrogen. And then you have these port-specific funding opportunities, which are available for inland ports as well. The Clean Ports Program, PIDP again, and the Reduction in Truck Emissions at Ports Program. And I think a lot of us know in the freight industry, there's idling trucks as a national issue, and a lot of these programs are targeted at reducing emissions at port facilities and in those communities. And finally, the last grouping was kind of our catch-all, this special purpose funding. These are just kind of an array of themes we've seen in our analysis. So there's a really big push right now to convert school buses and add that associated infrastructure. School districts are directly eligible to apply. Transit agencies, transit buses, research and development grants for the private sector, rail infrastructure and marine highway grants. There's a marine highway in Illinois, I'm sure many of you know, that parallels I-55. And finally, I wanted to cap this off with two success stories from the county. So Will County has their own CPACE program. It is the Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy Finance Program. It enables commercial property owners to obtain 100% long-term fixed rate financing on energy efficiency improvements, including EV charging, building improvements. So really getting at that multifamily. Will County in 2022 received over $10.5 million to help add household energy efficiencies in Tinley Park. But they did not use it for EV charging, but that is an applicable use. As well, the Lion Electric School Bus manufacturer, they received tax credits through the REV program at the state level. And with that program, it's kind of a tax credit program that stipulates community investment and job creation. So Lion Electric has stipulated to provide over 1,000 jobs by 2028 in Will County, and they receive income tax withholdings. They keep the income tax withholdings. And Will County also has numerous areas designated as priority within the REV program. You can check that out online. And I think I'm going to pass it to Linnea to talk more about grants.
All right, so yeah, here in this grant section, we have a few questions to just have a conversation about grants funding. Apologies for having the Menti code incorrect in the chat earlier. Thank you for the correction. So as this question loads up here, I can go ahead and read it out loud as well. Our first question is, have you applied for grant funding to install or implement alt-fuel or EV charging infrastructure? Whether that's individually with your organization, has your organization worked towards this? So yeah, go ahead and put answers in the Menti, and then also curious to just if people have an immediate thought or response to the question, if you want to either unmute or just chime in here in the room, or put an answer in the chat, please do. So yeah, we're loading this up as a yes or no question. So as we see, well, we've got two people who say yes. So I would love for the people saying yes to tell us a little bit more about what that grant was, what that experience was, whether that's in the chat or go ahead and just chime in.
I'm happy to. This is hi all. I'm Brian Ross. I'm with BP Pulse, EV charging services provider. We've applied for grant funding for in a number of programs in Illinois and in other states and areas where we're looking at putting out a network of publicly available fast chargers for customers at some of our BP or Amoco gas stations or Thornton's, any of our BP brands, or some dedicated EV charging hubs. I guess notably NEVI funding, not yet in Illinois. The Illinois DOT recently put out a I forget what they called it, but kind of a preview RFP, I believe, to their first NEVI RFP for partners. But we've been active in some other states and received some awards for sites. We're active and hope to be active in round 2 of the Charging Fueling Infrastructure Grant Funding, which is another federal program that announced their first round awards. I think last month, might have been the end of December, but I think it was in January. Another round is opening, we believe, later in the spring. And then at the state level, Illinois EPA, we've been successful in securing some Illinois EPA grants for some of our sites. And I guess, I mean, I could talk through. I'm not on the incentives team. I'm on the advocacy team, which works closely with them. But if you have specific questions about kind of best practices and approaching different grant programs, I'm happy to take some questions. If I can't answer anything, I'm happy to connect you with colleagues.
Great, thank you for that. Yeah, and then chiming in on the chat, Jackie Trainier says, we would like to, but don't believe we are eligible at the township level of government. So there's kind of a little more info, I'm assuming, from the no column. Yeah, anyone else who either replied yes or who replied no would like to kind of chime in a little bit about that experience or any information they have to share, please do.
I'll chime in. This is Elizabeth Irvin. I'm a Deputy Director in the Office of Planning and Programming at IDOT. So I'm both, we do some applying for various grants, and we're also, as folks have mentioned, working on our own grant program that will be coming out soon. So we, as a state, applied for the CFI, the last round, both for the corridor and the community program. The community program application was led by, as Anne mentioned in the chat, IFA, and they were successful. IDOT's corridor application was unsuccessful, unfortunately, but we did also receive funding through that accessibility and reliability program to replace broken chargers. So we'll be working on that program, as well as, and as others mentioned, we expect to see new rounds of those programs coming out soon. We also, as a department, applied to the competitive low-no program for transit buses. We were successful last year on a low-no application. So we are busy applying for as much of, making sure we get at least Illinois' fair share of this electrification funding, if not more so. And also, if people have questions about NEVI, I'm happy to, feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to point you to resources.
Great, thank you. Another comment from the chat, Marty Keene is chiming in to say the Will County Land Use Resource Recovery and Energy Division grant is open to all units of local government. So assuming that applies to township as well, kind of in response to that earlier comment. Yeah, and then I guess maybe last call for responses or questions or comments on this question before we go ahead and move to the next one here.
I guess,
yeah.
One question I have, just in terms of timeline, a lot of these applications are coming out fast and furious, and we're already about halfway through the IIJA programs. So as you're thinking about a plan, how does that timeline align? And as you get into the recommendation stage, are you sort of thinking about that piece?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, partly what we're trying to do is make all of the resources that we uncover over the course of the plan available now. So a lot of that is available through willcountyaltfuels.com. I would also say that if anyone is sort of looking at a grant application and is curious, what data is available through this plan to help support it? The answer is all of it. Please reach out. We are very happy to support. We've got lots of materials at this point, and are really keen to support folks, especially in Will County, who do have those questions. And yeah, as far as the final report, we will be coming out in June. So probably, you know, I know there are a couple of big ones that are coming out in the next couple of months, but there's another cycle of grants opening up towards the end of the year. So hopefully the news about this will circulate well and be very, very available for the next round too. And I see someone mentioning that they install EV chargers. It's a great plug.
Yeah, contact information in the chat there. All right, and then I think we'll move to the next question, kind of similar content here. Are you interested in installing charging infrastructure on your property or for your organization or business? So looks like we've had some responses come in already showing some interest. 9 people saying yes, 5 people saying no. So kind of similar topic of conversation here. But yeah, if anyone kind of prompted by anything we heard in the last question discussion, or kind of like specifically wants to just like express anything here, yeah, feel free to come off mute or put it in the chat, or if you're in the room, just go ahead and chime in. We did ask this question in our survey where Dan was sharing the results earlier. We're also hoping to hear more from people on their thoughts. We're interested in hearing from people who may make immediate use of the tools or information developed by this project. So yeah, anyone has any kind of additional thoughts about interest in installing charging infrastructure, yeah, please chime in.
As a property owner, is there a method of having the users of the charging station pay for their usage? I think that's that's something that needs to be discussed as far as like the encouragement for developers and multifamily residential owners or investors.
Sure.
Like how will this cost, even though we're gonna be adding it in, who's gonna pay for it? And
Yeah.
is there a mechanism right now to have people who wanna charge their vehicles to pay for it?
Yeah,
great question.
Kind of the good news for you is that as a property owner or manager, you have many more options available than, for instance, the feds who are trying to sort this out, right of ways in particular, where it's much more complicated. But for property owners, there are mostly 2 models. One is sort of a subscription model where you get a certain amount of usage, you can kind of plug in and expect to receive service on a regular basis. Another is sort of on a per kilowatt hour basis. In all cases, it's generally considered part of the cost recovery. I don't know if we have anybody from ChargePoint on the call, but generally the idea is that some of the revenue that's gathered over the course of charging is used to help to offset the cost of it. So it's common for property owners to work with an original equipment manufacturer like ChargePoint. They'll help with the grant application. Will often provide support on match for a grant. It's very common for these grants to have sort of an 80% grant amount, 20% local match. And usually the original equipment manufacturer will help come up with that local match and work with a property owner to sort of determine the best way to sort of factor that ongoing revenue into the sort of overall return on investment for the infrastructure.
Good. All right, great.
Right.
And then Brian Ross mentioned in the chat that, as he mentioned, BP Pulse is adding DCFC to BP retail sites like BP, Amoco, and Thornton's locations. We are partnering with, sorry, my mouse just jumped. We are partnering with public and private property owners to create dedicated EV charging hubs for the public, for fleets, etc. And then Drew Blake chimes in and says, I can speak to that if you would like. Drew Blake from ChargePoint. Yeah, go ahead and unmute if you'd like to answer that, Drew.
Yeah, just circling back, if you can hear me. We do have some investor related options that it's fairly common that we see with the municipalities where they get that 80% and they do want a matching fund for that 20%. We do have investor options that will own and operate to cover that cost if that's something you're looking for.
And I think one thing that I find is helpful, do you mind talking a little bit about the way that an organization like ChargePoint would engage with a property owner if somebody was interested in adding a charger to a retail establishment or something like that, like what the partnership sort of looks like at a super high level? Sorry to put you on the spot there.
No, you're fine. You're fine. So we do everything from assisting with the site planning, using our partner network to get all the cost estimates if you are applying for a grant. And we do have a grant writing team that will assist with filling out those applications. We are working with a lot of the CFI and the NEVI awardees, so we can help from pre-grant side of things all the way down to installation and turnkey solutions for municipalities.
And if I could chime in one more time to Drew. Drew, I'm an EV owner that had to pay a fairly large tow bill to have my car charged, my car towed to an actual working charging station. And then as it turned out, the station that I was brought to was in a hospital and it was a private charging station. ChargePoint puts every charging station, I guess, that it sells on their map, but they're not public. And there's nothing telling you that they're not public. So you could drive to 3 or 4 of them and find that you cannot use them.
I'm more than happy to, if we want to talk after the meeting, we can go through the app a little bit. There should be identifiers in there that we can discuss where to look for those. I'm sorry to hear about that.
We're at about 3:20 now. I know we go to 4, so I think we'll go ahead and move forwards. Back to Tori about some common grant application criteria.
Yeah, thank you. So a lot of these applications, a lot of the funding opportunities are pretty similar. These are kind of the high level main points that we found a lot of them have in common. So the level of need, preference is often given to locations where few chargers are available, where it might be difficult to place chargers like garages, multifamily, or where more EVs are registered or high mileage commuters live. And then back to the submissions, mention a lot of these programs again kind of generally target this emissions reduction, pollution reduction. Almost all the programs have an equity element to them, including both Justice 40 requirements from the federal government, as well as preference to applicants in low-income neighborhoods, multifamily housing, environmental justice communities, and kind of piggybacking off that, workforce development is a very large component of many of these programs, and it's an eligible expense under many of these programs, with those benefits directly targeting disadvantaged communities. Jobs, economic development, similar to the REV program, there's often a stipulation for job creation or local GDP contribution. And finally, this demonstration of previous successes and partnerships. So there's a lot of opportunities here for public sector partnerships with the private sector, and many of these opportunities encourage those multi-sector, multi-level partnerships. And in fact, a history of those partnerships makes your application more competitive. And given Will County successes with in this alternative fuel space, celebrating those in these applications and forging those partnerships further will help you in the long run. And back to Linnea about more successes.
All right, so yeah, to keep the conversation going, one thing we wanted to ask this group of people was about recent projects that have had strong benefits for the community. And so we're thinking about development projects, and we're thinking about economic development, tourism, housing, environmental protection. And we're also really interested in hearing about benefits for equity communities or environmental justice communities. So if you want to go ahead and enter the name of a project or a thought in the Menti, please go ahead and submit that. Or if you have, if this prompts a thought right away and you want to, you have an answer or want to type something in the chat, please do. So yeah, recent projects that have had strong community benefits.
And we're definitely very curious about Will County in particular, but if there are other projects in the area that have been developed in a way that has really sort of promoted the local community and been developed in cooperation and collaboration with folks that especially are sort of historically underserved or have been disproportionately impacted by emissions from transportation projects in the past. Yeah, we're particularly interested in hearing about some of that. And I will say that we're sort of teeing up some of the analysis that we anticipate starting out in the next task, which is really making sure that we find examples of projects being developed in a very sort of sensitive way, and highlight some of those for in particular for EV charging infrastructure. Yeah, please.
I know there's a new airport proposed to come to Will County, and there's been a lot of development with Hollywood Casino and the Rock Run development, North Point development. Will County booming.
Yeah.
A lot of different development. Just south of here in Kankakee, new battery plant, Belgian battery plant, and also in Bloomington, a new radiant plant. So we are becoming a hub in the EV space.
Oh yeah, yeah, all happening here. Are there particular benefits that you would highlight with those? I know, in many cases, there's a tremendous amount of sort of new job creation. A lot of the grant programs, a lot of focus on sort of that prevailing wage, making sure that people have sort of, jobs that sort of support their local community. Is there anything in particular that you would sort of highlight or?
Job is number one.
Yeah.
And I think because of the cluster of all these different types of projects coming here, it brings the education element to where it's like a snowball effect.
Yeah.
Because we have an educated workforce that's preparing to work in the new developments, then we're going to keep them coming.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to add to what he's saying, I think what you're seeing here in the state is, recently the Clean Energy Jobs Act, right, was signed here in the state of Illinois, and then within that bill, there's certain requirements for minority participation on some of these solar projects, which is eventually going to tie into this whole EV infrastructure. But specifically in Will County, what you've seen as far as locally, how it's helping the community job-wise, I can speak to two big projects that are currently going on here that have project labor agreement, that basically will ensure that local people are working on these projects. And one is the North Point project, and then two is the Rock Run development with the casino. Those two projects both have PLA agreements signed, which will ensure that people on those projects are making prevailing wage, and most of the people on those projects will be from the Will County area. And then along with that, in Manteno, the recent Goshen project that was just announced, that also has a PLA agreement as well. So those are probably the big three right now that you'll see, a lot of local people working, on those projects.
Awesome.
Pause, what was the third project you mentioned?
Goshen?
Goshen.
Yeah, that's going to be the EV battery plant. Yeah.
I got a question, and maybe Jackie Trainer can help answer it. Is there a concern from Will County when it comes to ESG? And we're talking about all this grant funding and potential investment from the outside, but I know Will County has a horrible track record with minority participation. There's no goals put in place on procurement or anything like that. And I know ESG is becoming a much larger concern. I know I'm with the Southland Black Chamber of Commerce. I forgot to introduce myself. My name's Cornell Darden Jr. But I just got a big company reach out to us because they were concerned that it would limit their investment opportunities because they don't look at minority suppliers or minority vendors enough. So they're putting a program in place, but with Will County's demographic, there's nothing of the sort. And the numbers of minorities that participate in Will County is abysmal. So we got all these great things going on. My concern is, would that become a factor in stopping investment from coming because of the ESG rating of the county? And I know most ESG ratings are more geared towards public traded companies, but more and more it's starting to go towards municipal governments and private companies as well.
Yeah, and in terms of, setting policy for future charters, that's probably outside of the scope of what we'll cover in this particular study. We can highlight some of those recommendations that, I think you're right in sort of pointing out that it's something that a lot of major employers and a lot of investors are looking very closely at. We've talked to a couple of the sort of larger original equipment manufacturers in this space, and one of the things that they sort of say is that if Illinois goes the way of California and signs on to Clean Cars Act and some other things, then you'll see a lot more investment here. And so I think you're right that sort of seeing that sort of very focused effort on heading in a certain direction is a necessary precursor for change. And I think what we will make sure that we do with our study is highlighting, what kind of support you can expect as a result of some of that very deliberate action. But yeah, I think it might be good for us to kind of follow up after this, because I would like to know a little bit more about sort of what that experience is like, and if there are particular pitfalls that we can sort of make sure that we're tracking as we get into strategies in particular, just to see if we can sort of highlight some of the opportunities that might exist if we, think about that direction.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I'm sure we'll connect with you. Yeah.
I know we just lost the screen really quickly and we're working on pulling it back up, but I do want to touch quickly on the fact that our Will County purchasing ordinance really outlays, very simply, we have to go to the lowest qualified bidder. Historically, there's never been any level of minority participation. We've never really even tracked that up until recent times. So we just created a vendor form that we're collecting that information to see what type of responses we're getting. We're seeing the writing on the wall of all these other things that are being handed down. Hey, we need to have minority business participation. We need to have various apprentice programs. So we're starting to see and position ourselves to be able to properly handle that for the future. But that is all outlaid within our county ordinances. So that'd be a change that would be coming forward from the Will County Board. But it's something we're starting to think about and making sure that we're ready for the future.
You work with the purchasing department?
I'm with the Will County Executive's Office.
Oh, awesome.
If I might, this is Mayor John Noak again. The original question about projects that have had an impact, and I think this is where it's important that we don't lose sight about the topic of all alternative energy sources, is the fact that we do have a fairly substantial investment by renewable natural gas. While not 100% impact, it is 300% reduction, especially for fleet services. And we have had a major investment in our community on a center that is providing long haul fleet operation servicing for renewable natural gas. And that company, if you're not aware, is looking to put a training center, which will create even more jobs for their industry into our county. So, we can't lose sight that there are other investments being made in this vein that may not be, hydrogen or EV, but are also having a major impact and can have a positive impact on our region.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's an ecosystem of solutions for sure.
And apologies for the technical glitch. We do have the screen back up and running. So 2 responses that came in through the Mentimeter were a lot of Route 66 grants, CEGA or JA training and minority participation, and then Rock Run Development Project, Joliet North Point, Joliet Goshen, Battery Plant, Mantino. Sorry if I'm pronouncing any of that incorrectly, but those are some more results we've had come in. Yeah, and then, I know we're at 3:30, so unless anyone else has any other thoughts on this topic, I think we can probably move ahead to our next slide. So go back to Adrian to discuss strategies.
Yeah, so this is real quick, but just kind of previewing mostly discussion that we're going to continue in our next stakeholder meeting. But we really want to highlight that the strategies are really geared towards knitting together a lot of the grant application criteria, community needs that we identify, and thinking about identifying strategies that meet a variety of different charging solutions. So everything from sort of those level 1 chargers at home or level 2 chargers at home, to those big DC fast chargers that are accessible in multifamily housing and sort of everything in between. So on the next slide, you'll see one map that you can also explore in great detail at your leisure, which is probably a good way to explore this much data, which covers all of the land use that's present in the county. And it might be a little bit laggy, but it's the big point for this map is just that we're going to be combining a lot of the data that we've gathered over the course of the project, thinking about things like land use, demographics, location of current planned chargers, location of alternative fuel corridors, many other factors to identify some of those place-based strategies. And then, of course, one of the data sets that we're going to be adding to the webpage, if you have been following along, is really around travel behavior. So we do want to make sure that we think about each of those charging solutions relative to the specific trips that tend to be made out of that location. So we'll look at everything from locations where there's a high concentration of trips that are 200 miles or more, higher concentration of trips that are 10 miles a day or less, and consider all the implications that go with the charger infrastructure that's sort of needed based on that charger behavior. And so we combine that together with the land use data and some of the other data sources that we've developed to kind of put this all together. And we will go over this in a lot more detail, so I wouldn't worry too much that you can't preview the maps. If you do want to take a look at them, they're all at willcountyaltfuels.com. So yeah, just to kind of summarize some of the big questions that we are facing as we get through strategies. We'll think about that travel behavior. We'll think about equity-focused communities, R3 communities, Justice 40 in particular, but also things that don't necessarily have that sort of federal mapped component, like the location of affordable housing, equitable workforce development. We'll look at where chargers are currently available, future chargers, and of course, opportunities. So any organization that has an interest that can be served by applying for charging infrastructure, we're looking to find more information about that. So in general, I would just say we're keen to hear from all of you, and hope that you'll you do reach out as you think about some of the resources that we're making available through the plan. And I think we're getting toward the last of the Mentimeter questions. Should we go to Mentimeter or open it up for discussion?
I think why don't we, in the interest of time, go ahead and open it up for discussion since our slides are lagging a little bit here. One thing we were curious about to hear from this group is, what do you think are some of the most iconic locations in Will County? And we bring this up just to think about the county, think about kind of locations that people know, and think about just to have that discussion with people who live here, work here, and are embedded in this community. So yeah, we'll go ahead and say, just either throw an answer in the chat or go ahead and unmute or chime in if you're here in person. Curious what people's thoughts are around this question. And I'll go ahead and put that in the chat as well in a moment.
So I will say that, one thing that we've thought a lot about are some of the conservation organizations in the county. McDonald Farm is located not too far from here, actually. I think there's a real opportunity to explore partnerships with organizations that are already thinking about the environment and conservation kind of in that way. I think we've got a couple folks here who are connected to the Black Chamber of Commerce. And so I wonder too about some of the local business organizations. I think having an intermediary that, can sort of help to sort of bring the kind of mountain of data that we're gathering over the course of this project and share it among your local networks, is a big benefit for kind of these conversations. And so, yeah, I guess I'm curious to hear like what other types of locations and types of organization you think might be helpful for us to sort of deepen that relationship with? Please.
So I'm also with the Southland Land Chamber of Commerce. We cover a pretty wide area. We span 4 counties plus Northwest Indiana. So I've seen Cook County make a big push towards EV charging and getting their businesses involved. And a program that we participated in last year, we brought businesses to the table for a survey program to see what their thoughts were in participating in a grant program where essentially ComEd and the county partnered together, and they would come out and install an EV charging station, a level 2 station, at their place of business. ComEd was gonna cover the cost of the charging stations, the installation and everything. And it was a 2-year pilot program where they would, the county would manage the charging station, and after 2 years, the ownership transfers over to the business. And that's something that showed a lot of interest, because if you need to go charge your car, go park your car in this parking lot and you walk inside the store because you don't want to sit in the car for half an hour. And you might buy some water, you might buy something to eat, you might go get a drink or whatever you might need to do that business has to offer. And there was a lot of interest in that. Now, the program itself in Cook County, I think it's stalled, if I'm not mistaken, because we haven't heard much about it since then. But that was something that was very interesting, and it kind of incentivizes participation from the businesses and gives them an opportunity to make some money after a couple of years, because now it's plugged into their grid and they'll be making the electric bill payments, but they'll also be making that money that comes with having a level 2 charger at their location.
Awesome. That's a great flag. Thank you.
From the data, the survey that you conducted, the 800 and so participants, for those who had EV vehicles already, did they give any kind of indication of where they gather? Because we could suggest, where major traffic generators would be, but that may not match with what people who have vehicles or where they're going and congregating are right now. So, I guess if they gave you that feedback, that would be helpful. If you didn't gather that feedback, when you complete your full out survey, if that would be helpful to decide, where are they currently gathering right now? Because they are decision makers in that regard. And
yeah, a couple of thoughts about it. So we didn't necessarily ask about the travel behavior of current EV owners in the survey itself, but we have a lot of data about this. In fact, one of the maps that Adrian unfortunately just didn't get to show on the screen here was where a lot of this workplace charging might be happening, or where the was it multifamily residence charging might be happening. So we actually have a fair amount of travel data that we're working through to identify those exact kinds of patterns that you're talking about. So where are people gathering? Where are they spending their time? Where are they spending different amounts of time that we might be able to target, some of these different charging solutions. And the other thing I'll say about this is that we also currently have another survey up, a mapping survey. I think it's in a couple of slides. I think it's actually coming up in a couple of slides. If you go to willcountyallfuels.com, okay, we do have another mapping survey that's up that's looking specifically at where those charging locations might be best placed. And we're definitely looking for ideas. We're definitely looking for your ideas, for the ideas of anybody on the phone. Please go ahead and take that. We have a decent number of responses already, but we definitely want all the info we can get about where those locations might be.
We also have in the chat Ann Schneider chimed in and said historic Route 66, Midwin Tallgrass Prairie.
These are iconic locations.
Other iconic locations, yeah.
the racetrack.
The racetrack.
Yeah.
And other than the obviously casinos.
Yes.
Yeah.
I say the River Valley, and of course downtown Joliet, and the Will County Fairgrounds.
Great. On to the next question.
Yes. Go ahead and move on to this one.
Yeah, we want, I mean, part of our motivation for asking these questions is to sort of maybe set, possible benchmarks of success for us. So it's like, what do you think, what are the iconic locations for Will County? And then how could EV charging or alt fuel infrastructure be integrated into these different locations? Which I think we've already talked a fair amount about some of these possibilities in terms of, having charging infrastructure at these business places, talking about entrepreneurship and maybe businesses that might be going, that where these chargers might be located. But we can also think about, I think going to Ann's point, talking about like Route 66. Would it mean success for us to have charging infrastructure along Route 66? Or would it mean success for us to have charging infrastructure in some of these new developments, whether it's the casino, the racetrack, some of the housing developments that we talked about? What other ways that you guys could think about would we be able to sort of integrate EV charging within these locations?
I think you hit it on the nail with the Route 66 corridor, and also the casino. Those are high traffic areas with the new Rock Run development. And then of course downtown is overhead. I think there's 3 or 4 parking garages, and I think there's a lot of opportunities there. A lot of county buildings, like the one we're in, are downtown, of course.
Yeah.
All right, great. And then next, question that we had was, we want to hear from this group of people, what other organizations have data resources that could really be meaningful for this report, for this work. Some thoughts we had include business improvement districts, community-based organizations, income qualified services. Other organizations that have data or information that would really kind of help inform this kind of siting strategy work.
One of the best ways you could get help is this is Mayor Noak again from Romeo, is to look at the municipalities that are already collecting visitor data for marketing purposes on any of their major corridors and ask them what are their highest visited locations within their communities, and that will give you a lot of data.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great thought. I don't know if anyone else has any other thoughts on that? Yeah.
Larger municipalities already collect all that data or have services that provide that data to them.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Will County has some of the most phenomenal chambers of commerce in Illinois, like the Romeoville Chamber, the Plainfield Chamber, Joliet Chamber. So I think definitely interfacing with the chambers of commerce, seeing what kind of data that they have and what their ideas are. And of course, there's a strong commitment to those chambers from the business community. So it's a good way to get the folks of the business community.
Yeah, great. Yeah, that's another great thought.
There's also the Will County Center for Economic Development. They have a lot of good information on the gas.
Great, yeah, thank you. All right, and I know we're at 3:45. Now that we're back online, did you want to? We could jump back and take a look at some of those maps, or do you want to move forward?
I think we're good.
Okay.
I will just invite you all to come to our coming stakeholder engagements and get to look at those and many more maps. Yeah.
Quick question. In your research, I'm assuming you've spoken with ComEd
Yes.
in regards to this infrastructure. Now, when you talk about like level 3 charging, that requires totally separate infrastructure from, like, say, an existing building where they, what ComEd would be required to set a new transformer, bring in, medium voltage, to the transformer, and then feed, whatever chargers are going to be installed. What do they say about that? Because recently we had one of our contractors install about 8 Tesla charging stations at the Target on Route 30 and 55. And that project was completed in September of last year. And as of right now, those chargers are still not powered up because of ComEd. I know they've got issues with getting transformers and some of the other things, but have they talked about that in what what they see going forward for themselves?
Yeah, I know they're working on a couple of studies right now to get a better handle on grid capacity and I think deciding sort of what data they feel comfortable sharing more publicly that sort of represents what is available at a specific location. It's kind of hard to sort of answer that question simply just because it's not just sort of like the substation capacity, but also sort of what other utilities exist in the area and what other sort of supporting infrastructure, as you know much better than I do, like is necessary there. So I think they're very leery about sort of sharing sort of misleading information. So I will say we're working closely with them. We've let them know that we are very keen to get anything they're able to share that helps us sort of anticipate and head off some of the exact types of challenges that I think you've shared. And I am sorry to say that unfortunately it's not super rare. A lot of the investor-owned utilities are sort of facing that same kind of challenge, and you know, basically everybody's like, I'd like to add a small city worth of power at this location. That's not a big problem, right? And all the utilities are like, wait, what is this? So yeah, I think it's just a little bit of sort of a learning curve as everybody tries to figure out how best to coordinate with each other. Yeah.
They did also, a couple other things, there are a couple other thoughts there about like, one of the things that they talked about was part of the challenge with releasing information about this is that it's always kind of changed. It's a sort of over a slow process. But let's say, we have like availability of the grid for this infrastructure in this one particular location. Putting that information out there means it will very likely change in 6 months. So that, different infrastructure projects could draw on the grid in a different way. And so they're kind of working on initiatives to try to smooth some of that out. They talk about smart grid initiatives that they have coming out to try to help manage the distribution of power at these different times of the day. And they also talk about I just had a thought, but some of the longer term studies that they have kind of going on to try to help prepare the grid for 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I mean, what they basically said is that the component pieces might not have the capacity. So like individual sites might not have the capacity. The overall grid is in good shape for at least 5 more years.
Yeah, because I think when you're looking at this thing as a whole, and if you anticipate the growth that that we see coming, right, with EVs, the level 2 charging stations are not going to cut it.
Right.
Okay, because you're talking about hours in terms of charging. You're going to need those level 3 charging stations, every so many miles, like you have gas stations. You can install the level 2 charging stations you want, but in reality, nobody's going to sit there for 4, 5, 6 hours to charge their vehicle.
Right.
I'm not totally sold on that, honestly. I do think that we'll have to make one big change, which is, instead of thinking about sort of gulp charging, thinking about sort of sip charging, and instead of sort of, waiting until your EV is, mission critical, generally, like if it's parked, it should probably be plugged in. Just because it does sort of take a lot of the pressure off the grid, and it's cheapest. So I agree, we need more of everything. I don't know necessarily, and I think it's gonna be a mix of all of those for sure.
I got a hard time remembering to charge my phone.
All the time.
It's like, there's almost a culture in some people to drive the check it, or not check it, the gas light on.
Right.
And the biggest thing they'll say is, oh, how far do we have to go? We can make it,
Yep.
And I remember hearing a story of a friend of mine who had to go from Indiana to Naperville along Route 30 one night in a snowstorm, and their Tesla couldn't make it and they couldn't find anywhere to charge at. And they wound up making it back home with like a 2% battery left, and how nerve-wracking that was. But he had just gotten the Tesla and just wasn't thinking about how far he was going and what he was doing and how much traffic he would run into on that drive, and he almost wound up stranded in a snowstorm, 30 miles from home, and couldn't make it. So I think we've got to do a lot to change that mentality that people have. I can make it, because I'm one of those people that I don't feel like stopping right now. I can make it, And then also, as far as what we were talking about with the grid and the current infrastructure capabilities, I remember reading, I don't know, maybe a year ago, how summer in California with everybody charging their EV cars and the electricity running at all the buildings and all the homes and the air conditioning running everywhere, that they actually released a statement asking people not to charge their cars for the next few hours. And you would think that they would have had an anticipation in their planning to say that, yeah, our grid is good for the next 5 years, but it didn't happen like that.
Yeah.
And so my concern is that, and a lot of people's concerns, those naysayers, the ones that say that they would never go electric and things like that, they're saying our grid can't handle it. So I think educationally, it's gotta be a big push to inform the public about how the infrastructure is going to change and what plans are in place for it to change right now, because like he just said, dropping off a substation and plugging it in is not something that can happen on the drop of a dime. I know personally of some big, corporations who have been working with ComEd and can't get their power station dropped off in a timely manner to get it up and running, and they've got to go deal with lobbyists and all these other people to just get their power up and running at their locations. So educationally, there really needs to be a push to get the public to understand what we're doing, and then ComEd and the power providers need to really push and put that plan in place in a way that is believable to the general public.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic point. Yeah, I mean, and California's, I don't know that a lot is generalizable from California, either on the EV experience or the kind of the grid side, but yeah, I mean, you'll see the same thing in places like Texas with, during the summer when everybody's got their, air conditioning's running at the same time. If you've got too much draw on the power on the grid at the same time, it will fail. Doesn't matter what it is. And yeah, I think it's going to be a suite of sort of solutions that make it possible to charge as much as we need.
I've got a comment on a completely different subject, so I'll pause unless if someone wants to continue on the grid part.
I think we're good. Yeah, please.
So I know we've been mostly talking today about passenger vehicle electrification, but I just wanted to put in a plug. I'm sure you all are thinking about this, but on the medium and heavy duty side of things, there are a lot of, you mentioned a few of the grant opportunities that are coming up soon. And I really do think that, Will County is positioned to both be really competitive in some of those federal grant programs, as well as have some real opportunities to reduce emissions and have some really positive impacts. So I just hope that's, I'm sure you're thinking about it, but hope that's part of the plan as well.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we keep mentioning the port in particular, because I think I'm probably going to mention that at every stakeholder meeting I can, until somebody is like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and have this opportunity. I think there's a lot of activity that happens at the inland port that is really very well suited to implement some of the hydrogen technology developments, especially, but also EV charging as well. I think it's a great opportunity for the county.
Well, and again, I must impress, while those are great technologies, the industry's already moving forward on renewable natural gas. That's being done without our assistance. We can't ignore the realities of where industry might go as well.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and then a couple other thoughts actually in the chat that have come in, kind of jumping back to some topics we were covering earlier, is Mark Schneiderwine says, part of the current funding of our road system has been placed on a fuel tax, which our county also uses, as do some cities, as the number of EVs increase, which is the desired goal. Is this study also considering alternative ways to fund their roads? So kind of a question on a different topic. I have not seen anything solid that's going to have a different outcome on cost of EVs for individual use. Elizabeth Irvin jumped in on that question and said IDOT is working on a study on impacts to MFT revenue from EVs and potential replacement options, and that should be released soon. And Schneider also says in Illinois, currently EVs pay an extra $100 per year, which 99 goes into the road fund. So some thoughts on that question, and some of the answers to that. Marta Keen says it seems important to work on CNG and hydrogen for heavy, long distance transportation needs. So kind of back to the heavy duty question. You have a great conversation going now. We also have some, I know we're kind of in the last 5 minutes here. We had some other questions that we wanted to also put to this group. I'm gonna, Adrian, if it's okay, if you want to talk about the MAP survey. We have or was this?
I covered, I mean, well, I already mentioned it, but again, please take our mapping survey, countyallfuels.com. You can also type in the full address there, wikimapping.com/willcountyallfuels.html. But it's probably easier to go to willcountyallfuels.com. But yes, go ahead.
And then we had a few other questions that we wanted to ask this group of people. One was, how do EVs and alt fuels fit into your organization's vision for the future? Yeah, and we're already kind of having a great conversation here. So if people just want to come off mute or type in the chat, or people in the room, if you have a thought as you think about this question. We have a pretty diverse group of people here, so we'd love to hear your thoughts about this.
I think it's really gonna help with some other, it's gonna, the good thing about there being a community impact is that, you could pair initiatives together and have them leverage each other for a greater good. So, there could be for instance, ride sharing programs and, high occupancy vehicles. This could be another, excellent incentive to, try to encourage that effort. And then for a lot of organizations that do a lot of the HOV travel anyways, like church organizations, sporting organizations, things like that, I think this is another great initiative for them as well, as, to be able to take advantage of this infrastructure.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this is our last question.
We actually have two more. We also know that other groups should be engaging.
I thought those were options.
Yeah, okay, let's do this then. Yeah, if anyone else has thoughts on this and your organization's vision for the future.
We definitely focus a lot on the passenger vehicle side of everything. We did talk a little bit about medium and heavy duty truck and long haul versus regional across town. One thing I will say is that I think what maybe a lot of people don't realize when they look at it just from the passenger vehicle side is that all these same issues we're talking about, whether it's adoption, people being comfortable with the technology itself, the infrastructure, all of that. You take all those issues and when you apply it to trucking, they're pretty much all multiplied by several times. And I know obviously you guys probably know that, but I think it's something that in the wider public I've seen that just not be there. And while there's definitely a lot of room for adoption in the trucking industry for that, when there's specific instances where it works, when it's like we talked about municipal, maybe garbage. I know a lot of the aggregate haulers for cement and stuff like that, they'll use the natural gas or something else, or if it's a set route, a short distance, back at the same place they ended each night. Those sort of things work really well for stuff like this. For the long haul over the road, I think there's probably still a long way to go for that. And then especially on the infrastructure side, to just having the good capacity for if you're talking specifically about charging for electric. So I think again, some people need to just to kind of keep that in mind when we're looking at that the adoption rate and what needs to happen to make it feasible for the wider industry in trucking is a lot more, just several levels above where it's at for passenger vehicles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of the way that these different charging infrastructure solutions could potentially function, where EVs potentially would work for more short haul things like what you're talking about, things like yard trucks, drayage, something like is another opportunity with port operations, and then setting up sort of these corridors for hydrogen, I think is kind of the direction where things are at right now in terms of the long haul trucking. So having, you know, enough hydrogen infrastructure available outside of the state of California is kind of the next step there. So that I believe that, I feel like I heard about a corridor that's being developed, like the port of Long Beach and from LA to Texas. Like they're trying to set up enough, they're trying to set up enough fueling infrastructure for hydrogen along there. That's, I think we could see more of that in the next few years. And CN, okay, great, Ann. I saw Ann's comment about CN is piloting electric drayage trucks in Canada.
Yeah, I think on that, you know, an important point is that, you know, especially, I mean, outside of EVs, a lot of those fuels are kind of at a pilot stage. Especially hydrogen, you have a couple of like really fantastic examples, like the Champaign-Urbana transit agency. They've got mobile hydrogen being produced on site. So I think that there are applications like that that could be ready now for different fuels, you know, hydrogen, you know, propane, CNG. I think there are a lot of different types of fuels that could be part of that mix to provide substantial emissions benefits. You know, one thing we're really looking very closely at is a lot of the new hydrogen hubs. You know, for a lot of these fuels, the big question is, how do we actually refuel the vehicle when we're ready? So your choices now are basically build it yourself, or you know, hope that somebody will build a very expensive kind of refueling infrastructure for you. And thankfully in Illinois, someone will do that. So the state did win a big grant from the Department of Energy to build a hydrogen hub here. So I think one of the kind of big recommendations, unfortunately, for hydrogen is a little bit wait and see.
Yeah, and so maybe what technologies really start taking off, or if there's breakthroughs in certain things, and whether it's, you know, battery weight and size, or, you know, hydrogen, you know, whatever it is, that could, you know, benefit one over the other in adoptions. Yeah, some of them may, and that's why I think it will take a mix of a lot of different ones to really see where it, you know, where it goes.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, and I didn't know about the hub, so it's good news.
Yeah, and even, I mean, you know, battery swap technology. You know, maybe you don't drive across the country on a battery. You just chuck it and get a new one. Maybe you shouldn't chuck it.
Recharging. Yeah, exactly. Leave that for the next guy.
In the chat, we did have two people chime in. Don Schaefer says, California is already proving it's not ready for its aggressive ramp up of heavy duty EVs. We'll take a balance of fueling options for the coming years as the technology needs to catch up. Illinois is definitely not ready. You know, currently, Marta Keen chimes in and says, transitioning to clean fuel sources is important. So yeah, two more thoughts from the chat. Yeah, and I know we're at time, but if anyone else has thoughts or wants to chime in on this question, please do. But yeah, I know we're all.
One thing I just want to say real quick is we always need to remember challenges will arise to all these technologies, and we just need to keep that in mind and remember they got to be nimble and flexible. You know, there's always going to be different challenges that, you know, people don't think about. You know, when we talk about, you know, what you would do at your organization, you know, government fleets are going to be difficult. You can't easily turn a police car into most of these things because you're constantly running it. Can't do a snow plow because of the limitations there, and you could be constantly running it. There are always going to be challenges. So we always got to be looking at what our full portfolio of options are.
Yes, but there's opportunities too. School buses are a good opportunity. That's why there's this target. Yeah.
Well, I just want to say,
And there's going to be new opportunities. So that's why we always have to keep our eyes open on what those are.
So I just want to say thank you so much for coming out. It's been a long 2 hours. I really enjoyed the conversation. I have really appreciated the input from each and every one of you. It's really been it's been a real asset to us as we put this team to get this plan together to hear from all of you. So really, thank you so much for being out here. And that goes just as much for everybody on the call. So thank you for joining us virtually and sticking it out to the end.
Thank you.
Please find the sign and sheet. Let everyone know.
But I kept going after you. See, it's not. I guess. Good, how you doing? Good to see you again.